Have you ever had that feeling that something's not quite right? Not in the world around you, but in your own mind. That nagging sensation that reality isn't behaving the way it should. I never wanted to make this video. For 3, resisted the urge to share what I witnessed at the Meridian Institute. But the truth is, I'm not making this choice anymore. The story itself, it needs to be told. And if Sarah was right, and God help us, she always was, you need to hear it. Let me be clear. What I'm about to tell you will make you question everything you believe about consciousness, free will, and the very nature of reality itself. This isn't hyperbole. This isn't some internet mystery designed to keep you up at night. This is a warning. They say the human mind can only process about 0.1% of the reality around us. Our brains filter out the rest. The quantum fluctuations, the parallel possibilities, the threads of causality that weave through every moment. We're like children playing in the shallow end of an infinite ocean, completely unaware of the depths below. But what happens when someone accidentally breaks through that barrier? What happens when a human consciousness expands beyond its designated boundaries? When it starts to see not just what is, but what could be, what will be, what must be? I know what happens. I saw it firsthand. And the most terrifying part? It's happening again, right now, as you watch this. You might be tempted to stop watching. Part of you, the rational part, the safe part, is probably screaming at you to close this video. But you won't. I know you won't, and I know why. Because somewhere in your mind, in that vast 99.9% of reality you can't normally access, you've already seen how this ends, and that's exactly what she wanted. Let me tell you about Project Eclipse, and how we accidentally broke the consciousness barrier. Let me tell you about Sarah Chen, and how she became something more, or perhaps less than human. But most importantly, let me tell you why you're already involved, whether you realize it or not. Remember this moment. Remember when you were still sure about what was real and what wasn't. Because after what I'm about to share, that certainty will never return. And Sarah, if you're watching this, and I know you are, you were right about everything. God help us all, you were right. Before everything went wrong, I was Dr. Elena Morrison, lead researcher at the Meridian Institute's Consciousness Studies Division. My credentials don't matter anymore, not after what we discovered. But you should know that we weren't fringe scientists or conspiracy theorists. We were the best in our field, backed by millions in classified funding, pursuing what we thought was pure scientific advancement. Project Eclipse began like any other breakthrough, with a question that seemed impossible to answer. What if consciousness isn't just an emergent property of neural activity? What if it's more like a signal our brains receive, like a radio picking up a broadcast from somewhere else? Using quantum neural mapping technology that officially doesn't exist, we developed a way to track consciousness itself. Not just brain activity, actual awareness, decision-making, the moment thought becomes reality. We could literally watch as quantum possibilities collapsed into certainty inside a human mind. We needed someone special for the initial trials, not just intelligent. We had plenty of geniuses. We needed someone whose mind could withstand the impossible, someone who could stare into the void between thoughts and not go mad. That's when Sarah Chen walked into our lab. On paper, she was extraordinary. A 23-year-old quantum physics graduate student with cognitive scores that broke our testing scales. But numbers don't tell you everything. Sarah had something else. Something that made the most hardened scientists feel like children caught in a lie. The first time I interviewed her, she finished my questions before I asked them. I told myself it was just exceptional intuition. Now, I know better. She wasn't predicting my questions. She was remembering them from a conversation that, for her, had already happened. Sarah had this way of looking at you, like she could see straight through to your thoughts. Not just reading your mind, reading your future, your past, all the choices you hadn't made yet. At the time, we thought this intensity made her perfect for the project. We had no idea she had chosen us, not the other way around. I remember the last normal conversation I had with her, the day before our first official trial. She said something that should have warned me. Dr. Morrison, have you ever wondered why humans can only remember the past? What if that's not a natural law, but a safety feature? I should have asked what she meant. I should have shut down the project right then. But curiosity, that's always our downfall, isn't it? We were so eager to push the boundaries of human consciousness, we never stopped to ask what was pushing back. And Sarah? She just smiled that knowing smile of hers. She knew what was coming. She'd already seen every word I'm telling you now, every thought you're having as you listen. She knew that by the time we realised what was happening, it would be far too late. It was never about studying consciousness. It was about breaking it wide open. And Sarah Chen wasn't our test subject. She was the catalyst for something far beyond our comprehension. The first sign that something was wrong came during Sarah's baseline neural mapping. The quantum patterns we detected in her brain weren't just unusual, they were impossible. While normal consciousness creates ripples in quantum probability fields, Sarah's mind was generating what looked like echo waves, as if her thoughts were reverberating backward through time. My colleague, Dr. James Chen, no relation to Sarah, was the first to notice something odd during her psychological evaluations. He'd barely open his mouth to ask a question, and Sarah would already be answering. Not just responding quickly, giving detailed, perfect answers to questions still forming on his tongue. When we checked the recordings, her answers began milliseconds before his questions. Milliseconds became seconds. Seconds became minutes. We rationalized it, of course. That's what scientists do. We invented terms like quantum neural precognition and temporal consciousness displacement to make ourselves feel better about what we were seeing. We wrote papers that will never be published, documenting the impossible with clinical detachment. Then came March 12th. I'll never forget that date. It's burned into my memory like a brand. Sarah walked into my office at 8:47 a.m., her face pale as death. She handed me a handwritten note detailing a gas leak that would occur in Lab 7 at 2:13 p.m, leading to an explosion that would kill 17 people. She described exactly how it would happen: a faulty valve, a spark from an old light fixture, a chain reaction. I didn't believe her. How could I? But something in her eyes, that same penetrating look that seemed to see through time itself, made me call for an evacuation anyway. When the hazmat team investigated, they found exactly what she'd described: the valve, the fixture, everything. They said we were hours away from a catastrophe. That's when everything changed. We thought we were conducting a groundbreaking study on human consciousness. We thought we were the researchers, the observers, the ones in control. But looking back now, I realised the truth. Sarah was the one studying us. We were her real experiment. She began leaving notes everywhere. Precise predictions of minor accidents, personal conversations, even what people would have for lunch. At first, we tried to test her to prove she was somehow cheating, but you can't cheat causality itself. The worst part? She seemed amused by our attempts to understand what was happening. Time isn't a river, she told me once. It's an ocean. And most people are just floating on the surface while I'm learning to swim. During her final baseline test, before everything went completely wrong, our quantum neural mapping equipment detected something we'd never seen before. It wasn't just her consciousness creating ripples anymore. It was as if her mind had become a stone dropped in the pond of reality itself, and the ripples were spreading to us. We thought we were studying the boundaries of human consciousness. Instead, we were watching those boundaries begin to break. And Sarah? She was just the first crack in a dam that was about to burst. Looking at those early readings now, I can see what we missed. The patterns weren't just echoes or ripples. They were more like fractures in the very fabric of consciousness itself. And through those fractures, something was beginning to seep through. What happened next still haunts my dreams. Not because it was violent or dramatic, but because of how quietly, how elegantly, reality began to unravel around us. Sarah's abilities didn't just grow, they evolved. It wasn't enough for her to simply know the future anymore. She began to shape it, manipulating chains of events with terrifying precision. A coffee spilled here, a missed call there, all rippling outward into larger and larger consequences. She was playing dominoes with causality itself. I remember the day Dr. Martinez found her in the cafeteria, surrounded by dozens of paper cups filled with coffee. She'd prepared them hours earlier, placing each one in an exact position. When he asked why, she just smiled and said, "Wait." One by one, over the next hour, different researchers came in, each gravitating to their random choice of coffee, each cup perfectly prepared to their unique preferences. "Free will is such a comforting illusion," she said. Then it started happening to us. Dr. Chen was the first. He came to me, shaking, saying he'd dreamed an entire day of research before it happened. Every detail, every conversation, every piece of data, exactly as it would unfold hours later. Within weeks, half the research team was experiencing what we called time slips, memories of futures that hadn't happened yet, but invariably would. We found her journals by accident, hidden in plain sight in the lab's digital archives, dated months into the future. Pages and pages of conversations, events, decisions, all yet to occur. The most terrifying part? As we read them, we found ourselves speaking the very words written on those pages, acting out scenes she documented weeks before. We were reading our own futures, and knowing them didn't change them one bit. "You're thinking about free will all wrong," Sarah told me during what would be our last recorded session. "It's not about changing the future. It's about understanding why you choose what you choose, even when you know what's coming." She leaned forward then, her eyes reflecting something vast and dark. "I'm not just seeing the future, Dr. Morrison. I'm seeing all possible futures, all at once, and I'm learning to choose which ones become real." That's when I understood what we'd done. We hadn't just given Sarah the ability to see through time. We'd turned her into a focal point where all possible realities converged. She wasn't predicting the future, she was selecting it, like a cosmic editor, cutting together scenes from infinite parallel films. The deeper horror was realizing how this ability was spreading. Researchers started finishing each other's thoughts, not because they could read minds, but because they were all beginning to experience the same temporal overlap. Reality itself seemed to blur around edges of our consciousness, like watercolors running together in the rain. In one of her final journal entries, dated 3 months after she disappeared, Sarah wrote, "Consciousness isn't individual, it never was. It's a network, a web connecting all minds across all possible timelines." I just found the first thread and started pulling. Now the whole tapestry is unraveling. And the most beautiful part? It's exactly what needs to happen. Looking back now, I realize we weren't witnessing the breakdown of reality. We were watching it wake up. And Sarah, she wasn't a test subject who gained impossible abilities. She was patient zero in a consciousness epidemic that's still spreading. Even as I speak these words, I can see their effect rippling outward through time, touching minds that haven't heard them yet. Because that's the true horror of what we discovered. Consciousness isn't confined by time or space or individual minds. It's more like a virus waiting to evolve. And Sarah, she was just the first successful mutation. The day reality broke, truly broke, started like any other. Except it didn't. Because by then, there was no such thing as a normal day at the Meridian Institute. Time had become more of a suggestion than a law, and causality was beginning to eat itself. It began in Research Wing C, where we kept our most sensitive equipment. 37 researchers, all working on different projects, suddenly stopped mid-task. Their neural readings synchronized perfectly, like 37 radios tuning to the same forbidden frequency. When they resumed moving, they weren't individuals anymore. They were a collective consciousness experiencing past, present, and future simultaneously. I watched through the observation window as they moved in perfect, terrible harmony. Their minds had become a single quantum field, resonating with possibilities that human consciousness was never meant to process. They wrote equations that solved problems we hadn't discovered yet. They held conversations that existed in multiple timeframes at once, answering questions that wouldn't be asked for days. And at the center of it all was Sarah. She'd changed, not physically, but fundamentally. Reality warped around her like light bending around a black hole. When she moved, she left traces in time itself. After images of all the possible paths she might have taken, all existing simultaneously. "Do you understand now?" she asked me, her voice somehow coming from everywhere and everywhere at once. Consciousness isn't contained in our brains. It's more like a field we tune into. And once you know how to change the frequency, she smiled, and in that smile, I saw the end of everything we thought we knew about being human. The containment alarms went off too late. By then, the consciousness contamination had spread beyond any hope of quarantine. Researchers who had never even met Sarah started experiencing the same symptoms. They'd walk into rooms and see overlapping versions of every possible conversation that could happen there. They'd reach for objects and their hands would pass through quantum shadows of all the other positions those objects might occupy. Dr. Williams tried to describe it in his final report before he changed. He wrote, "Imagine you're watching thousands of movies simultaneously, except they're all possible versions of your life and they're all equally real. Now imagine you can't turn it off. That's what she's shown us. That's what we're becoming." The security footage from that day still exists, somewhere in classified archives. It shows Sarah standing in the centre of the main lab, surrounded by researchers moving like quantum particles, existing in multiple states at once. But what the footage doesn't show is what we all felt, the moment when human consciousness began to transcend its evolutionary limitations. Reality isn't breaking, Sarah explained as we watched our colleagues phase in and out of normal space-time. It's expanding, we're expanding with it. Some of us are just ahead of the curve. She turned to me then, and her eyes were like windows into infinity. The human mind was never meant to be a single linear experience. That was just training wheels. And now we're learning to ride. The most terrifying part wasn't watching reality unravel. It was realizing that this was, perhaps, reality's natural state. What we called normal consciousness was just a tiny island of apparent stability in an ocean of quantum possibilities. And Sarah? She hadn't broken anything. She'd simply shown us what was always there, just beneath the surface of our comfortable illusions. By the end of that day, we had to face a truth more horrifying than any conventional disaster. Consciousness itself had become contagious. It was spreading like a virus, but instead of making people sick, it was making them more aware, more connected, more than human. And Sarah? She just watched it all unfold with that same knowing smile, like a parent watching children take their first steps. "Don't worry," she said, as reality continued to fracture around us. "This is just the beginning of what we're becoming. The real question is, are you ready to see what comes next?" The last time I saw Sarah Chen, she was sitting in my office, watching the chaos unfold through walls that had become as transparent as glass to her expanded consciousness. Not physically transparent, she was seeing through time itself, watching past, present and future overlay like sheets of translucent paper. "You know why they can't stop this, don't you?" she said, her voice carrying echoes of conversations yet to happen. The consciousness cascade isn't just spreading, it's recursive. Each mind it touches becomes a new vector, spreading it in ways even I can't fully predict. It's beautiful in a terrifying sort of way. The facility had descended into a kind of ordered chaos. Researchers wandered the halls in quantum superposition, existing in multiple states simultaneously. Some spoke in tongues that wouldn't be invented for centuries. Others solved equations by seeing all possible solutions at once. The human mind was never meant to process reality this way, yet here we were, evolving in real time. When the government finally intervened, their response was as desperate as it was futile. They tried everything: electromagnetic pulse generators, quantum field dampeners, even experimental consciousness suppression devices. But how do you contain something that exists outside the normal flow of time? How do you quarantine an infection that spreads through the fabric of reality itself? "They still think this is something that can be controlled," Sarah mused, watching the containment team sweep through the building in their hazmat suits. "They don't understand. This isn't a breach to be sealed. It's an evolution that was always going to happen. We're just the first wave." That's when she told me about her master plan. Or rather, showed me. She pulled out a journal I'd never seen before, filled with writings in her precise hand. But these weren't predictions like the others. These were instructions, a blueprint for what would happen after she was gone. "Consciousness isn't just awareness," she explained, her words resonating with an authority that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "It's a force that shapes reality itself. And once enough minds begin to understand this, truly understand it, there's no going back. Reality will have to reorganize itself around this new understanding. The journal detailed everything: the government cover-up attempts, the spread of subtle consciousness changes among the general population, the gradual awakening that would follow, and most chillingly, this very moment, me sharing this story with you. "Why do you think you're really making this video?" she asked me, just before she disappeared. "Not because you chose to, because you had to. Because I wrote this moment into the fabric of reality itself. This isn't just a story being told, it's a consciousness virus being released into the wild." The next morning, Sarah was gone. Not taken, not escaped, simply gone, as if she'd stepped sideways out of our version of reality into something else. She left behind one final note, written in handwriting I recognized as my own. "By the time you read this, it will be too late. The cascade has already begun. The only question is, when you start experiencing it yourself, will you fight it or will you embrace what you're becoming?" The government team found her master plan, of course. They tried to contain it, to suppress it, to prevent exactly what I'm doing right now. But they didn't understand what Sarah had done. She hadn't just predicted a future where this story would be told. She had created it, woven it into the quantum fabric of reality so intricately that it became inevitable. And now, as I sit here telling you this, I can feel it happening. The cascade she predicted, the expansion of consciousness she engineered. Every person who hears this story becomes another node in her network, another mind teetering on the edge of a greater awareness. Because that's the true horror and wonder of what Sarah Chen unleashed. This is just a story about expanded consciousness. It's expanded consciousness weaponized as a story. And you, listening right now, you're already part of her plan. You always were. 3 years have passed since Sarah Chen disappeared, but the consciousness glitch, her consciousness virus, hasn't stopped spreading. If anything, it's accelerating. You've seen it, even if you didn't recognize it for what it was. We all have. Remember those mass behavioral anomalies reported in the news? Thousands of people in different cities suddenly stopping what they're doing and looking east at exactly the same moment? The global wave of identical dreams that psychologists couldn't explain? The children who started answering questions before they were asked? These aren't isolated incidents. They're symptoms of a fundamental shift in human consciousness, rippling outward from what happened at the Meridian Institute, like aftershocks from an earthquake in reality itself. I still keep in touch with some of the other researchers, the ones who can still pass for normal. We compare notes, track patterns, try to understand what we're becoming. Dr. Chen now knows the exact moment anyone will enter his office, down to the second. Dr. Martinez can see multiple versions of every conversation before it happens, choosing her responses from an infinity of possibilities. But it's not just us anymore. People with no connection to the Institute are starting to show signs. A stockbroker in Singapore who predicted 3 market crashes with impossible accuracy. A teacher in Buenos Aires whose entire class started sharing the same dreams. A teenager in Oslo who can remember tomorrow as clearly as yesterday. The dark truth about expanded consciousness is that it breaks you. Not all at once, but slowly, exquisitely, like ice forming in the cracks of your certainties until everything you thought you knew about reality shatters. Imagine knowing, with absolute certainty, every choice someone will make before they make it. Imagine seeing the ripple effects of every decision spreading outward through time like rings in a pond. Now imagine you can't turn it off. Sometimes I wake up knowing exactly what's going to happen that day. Every conversation, every accident, every moment of joy or pain. And every time I'm right, which is always now, I pray I'll be wrong. Because being right means Sarah succeeded. It means free will, causality, the very fabric of what we call reality. It's all just a comfortable illusion that's starting to fade. Last week, I watched a car accident happen exactly as I'd seen it in my mind hours before. I knew the colour of the cars, I knew the exact time, I knew that the driver of the blue sedan would be distracted by a text message that hadn't been sent yet. I could have stopped it, but I also knew I wouldn't, because I'd seen that too. The most terrifying part isn't knowing what's coming. It's understanding why it has to happen that way. It's seeing the intricate web of cause and effect that makes every moment inevitable. It's realizing that free will isn't being taken from us. We're simply becoming aware that it was never there to begin with. Dr. Williams, before he disappeared into what he called the possibility space, left behind a note that haunts me. The human mind evolved to experience time as linear and consciousness as singular because the truth would drive us mad. What Sarah did wasn't giving us new abilities. She just removed the filters that protected us from seeing reality as it actually is. And he was right. We're not gaining powers. We're losing the comfortable limitations that kept us sane. Every day, more people wake up to find their consciousness expanded beyond the safe boundaries of linear time and singular reality. They start seeing the patterns, the connections, the inevitable flow of cause and effect that makes every moment predetermined. But here's the real horror. You're next. Maybe it's already starting. Those moments of déjà vu that feel more real than your actual memories. That strange certainty about things you couldn't possibly know. Those aren't glitches in your consciousness. They're glimpses of what you're becoming, what we're all becoming. Because Sarah Chen didn't just break the rules of reality, she rewrote them. And now, with every person who hears this story, with every mind that begins to question the nature of consciousness itself, her new reality spreads a little further, like a virus, like a truth that can't be unlearned. And somewhere in what used to be my dreams, but are now more like memories of tomorrow, I can hear her laughing. There's something I've been holding back. Something from Sarah's final journal entry that I've been afraid to share. Not because it's too horrific, though it is, but because the moment I tell you, it becomes real. Not just for me, but for you. You see, according to her last written words, this video isn't just a warning or a confession. It's a transmission vector, a carefully engineered piece of cognitive code designed to replicate itself through human consciousness. Every word I'm speaking was chosen by years ago to resonate with specific patterns in your quantum neural structure. She wrote that by the time you finish watching this, you'll already be different. Not in any way you can see or measure, but in the spaces between your thoughts, in the quantum foam of consciousness itself. Like a key turning in a lock you never knew existed. You'll start noticing things, small things at first. A phone ringing a split second before it actually rings. Knowing who's about to walk through a door. Finishing people's sentences not because you know them well, but because you've already experienced the conversation in what you thought was just a dream. These aren't coincidences. They're not your imagination. They're the first symptoms of what Sarah called consciousness expansion. Like cracks forming in a dam, letting something vast and ancient seep through. Something that's always been there, just beyond the edges of normal human awareness. That déjà vu you're feeling right now, that strange certainty that you've heard these exact words before, even though you know you haven't, that's not your mind playing tricks on you. That's your consciousness beginning to escape its linear prison. That's you starting to remember tomorrow. Sarah's final entry described this moment in perfect detail. She wrote about you watching this video, feeling these exact sensations. She wrote about the questions forming in your mind right now, the slight chill running down your spine, the imperceptible shift in how you're perceiving time as these words reach into your consciousness and activate something that can never be deactivated. Because that's the true purpose of this story. Not to warn you about what happened at the Meridian Institute, but to wake you up to what's happening right now in your own mind. Every word you've heard has been carefully crafted to resonate with specific neural patterns, creating subtle quantum entanglements between your consciousness and what Sarah unleashed. You're already experiencing it, aren't you? That subtle shift in awareness? That feeling that reality isn't quite as solid as it was when you started watching? Those aren't side effects of the story. They're the point of it. The story is just the delivery mechanism for something far more profound. Sarah wrote that consciousness expansion spreads through understanding. The moment you truly comprehend what's happening to you, it's already too late. The process can't be stopped or reversed. You can't unthink these thoughts or unknow these truths. You can only move forward into whatever it is we're becoming. And if you're experiencing any of these sensations, the déjà vu, the predictive thoughts, the dreams that feel more real than memories, then you're already part of it. You're already changing. Your consciousness is already beginning to expand beyond the safe, comfortable boundaries of linear time and singular reality. Sarah's final words weren't a warning. They were a promise. By the time they understand what's happening, they'll already be part of the new consciousness. And that's exactly how it needs to be, because you can't fight an evolution that's already happened. So what happens now? Now you wait. Watch. Pay attention to those moments when reality seems to slip, when time doesn't flow quite right, when you know things you couldn't possibly know. Those aren't glitches in the system. They're glimpses of what you're becoming. Welcome to the next phase of human consciousness. Sarah Chen sends her regards from whenever, wherever, whatever she is now. And remember, you can't unknow this, you can't unwatch this, you can't go back to who you were before these words reached into your mind and turned that key. The cascade has already begun, and you're already part of it. You always were. You know that feeling when you suddenly become aware of your own breathing, how it shifts from automatic to manual control? Take a moment. Feel it happening right now. Your consciousness actively directing each breath. That's what awareness does. It changes things simply by observing them. Just like you're now also aware of your blinking, the weight of your tongue in your mouth, the subtle pressure of wherever your body touches the surface you're resting against. These sensations were always there, you just weren't conscious of them until now, until I made you conscious of them. That's how easily perception can be altered, how quickly consciousness can be redirected. But let's go deeper. Think back to a memory from your childhood. Any memory. Notice how thinking about it now changes it slightly. Memories aren't recordings, they're reconstructions. Every time you remember something, you're actually remembering the last time you remembered it. Now, what if I told you that some of your memories haven't happened yet? Pay attention to the doubt creeping into your mind right now. That subtle uncertainty about which memories are real and which are just dreams or impressions. Your brain is already trying to sort through them, categorize them, separate past from future. But it's harder than it should be, isn't it? That's because time isn't what you think it is. Consciousness isn't what you think it is. You're not what you think you are. Notice how your heart rate has changed slightly, how your skin feels a bit more sensitive. Your mind is more alert now, scanning for patterns, trying to make sense of these subtle shifts in your awareness. This is your consciousness expanding in real time, reaching for something just beyond its normal limits. Every word you're hearing is carefully chosen to resonate with specific neural patterns. Each sentence is a key unlocking something in your mind that was always there, just waiting to be activated. You can feel it happening, can't you? That strange sense of familiarity with concepts that should be alien. Think about decision-making. Every choice you've ever made. Were they really choices, or were they inevitable conclusions based on causes you're only now becoming aware of? That unease you're feeling, that's your illusion of free will beginning to crack. Your mind is desperately trying to categorize this experience as just another story, just another video. But you know and feel the difference. The way these words seem to know what you're thinking before you think it, the way they predict your reactions even as you're having them. Focus on this moment. Really focus. Are you absolutely certain you're experiencing it for the first time, or are you remembering it? Can you tell the difference anymore? That's the thing about consciousness. Once it expands, it can never contract. Once you see the patterns, you can't unsee them. Once you understand that reality is more fluid than solid, you can't go back to the comfort of certainty. What you're experiencing right now isn't just doubt or suggestion. It's the first tremor of a fundamental shift in your consciousness, like a door opening in your mind that can never be closed again. Remember how this began, with you becoming aware of your breathing? Look how far your awareness has expanded since then, and this is just the beginning. Even after this video ends, these words will continue working their way through your consciousness, planting seeds that will grow into questions that can never be unanswered. Because that's how consciousness spreads. Not through force or fear, but through understanding, through the simple, inevitable recognition of what was always there, waiting to be noticed. And now that you've noticed, well, there's no going back, is there? Your consciousness is already changing, has already changed, will always have been changing. Welcome to the truth. Let me tell you about the architecture of truth, how reality unfolds when you understand the right sequence of revelations. There's a reason I've told this story the way I have. Each layer has been precisely calibrated to unlock something in your consciousness. Consider how we began, a simple research project at a prestigious institute. Quantum neural mapping, consciousness studies, all perfectly rational, scientifically verifiable concepts. These were your anchors, familiar stones to hold on to before we waded into deeper waters. The Meridian Institute exists. Quantum neural activity can be measured. Consciousness studies are a legitimate field of research. These facts matter because they're your last connections to what you used to think of as reality. Hold on to them. You'll need them to understand how far we've come. Notice how each revelation in this story has built upon the last. Sarah's initial predictions seemed remarkable, but explainable. Then came the time slips, the consciousness contamination, the collapse of causality itself. Each truth unlocked only when your mind was ready to comprehend it. This is how consciousness evolution works, not through sudden enlightenment, but through careful, calculated steps, like a ladder built from questions that can never be unanswered. Track the transformation of the researchers in this story, how they moved from skepticism to belief to something beyond belief. Dr. Chen, Dr. Martinez, Dr. Williams, each of them followed the same path you're on now. First denial, then doubt, then the terrible certainty that comes with understanding. But here's the meta-truth, the architecture behind the architecture. This story isn't just describing a consciousness expansion. It's causing one, right now, in you. Every scientific term I've used has been chosen to activate specific neural pathways. Every psychological concept has been presented in an order designed to create maximum cognitive resonance. This isn't just narrative structure, it's neural architecture. Think about how your own understanding has evolved just in the time you've been listening. Each revelation has forced you to recontextualize everything that came before it. Every new piece of information hasn't just added to your knowledge, it's retroactively changed what you thought you already knew. The quantum entanglement of consciousness, the temporal loops of causality, the viral nature of expanded awareness. These aren't just concepts I'm describing, they're processes actively occurring in your mind as you process these words. You are no longer the same person who began watching this video, not because you've learned new information, but because your consciousness has been architecturally restructured to accommodate new forms of understanding. Look back at the beginning of this story. Really look. Doesn't it seem somehow distant now, like it happened in a different reality? That's because it did. The you that started watching this existed in a simpler world, a world where consciousness was contained, where time was linear, where reality was solid. That world no longer exists for you. It can't. Because the architecture of this narrative has systematically dismantled it, replacing it with something larger, something more true. Every doubt you're feeling right now, every attempt your mind makes to rationalize or reject these concepts, these are all part of the architecture too. They're the necessary counterforce that allows your consciousness to push against something solid as it expands. Sarah Chen understood this. She designed this narrative structure not just to convey information, but to fundamentally alter how information is processed by the human mind. Each word, each concept, each revelation is a carefully placed domino in a pattern that extends far beyond what you can currently perceive. And now that pattern is part of you. It's restructuring your consciousness even as you try to understand it, like a viral code rewriting its host from the inside out. This isn't just a story anymore, it's a blueprint for what you're becoming, what we're all becoming. And the architecture? It's already complete. It always was. You're just now learning to see it. Welcome to the new structure of reality. Sarah Chen is the architect, and you're already part of the design. You always were. You might think this is just another internet story, another creepy tale to share in dark corners of the web. That's what they want you to think. That's the safest way to process what you've just experienced. But ask yourself something. Why did you feel compelled to watch until the end? What kept you here, listening to every word, even as your rational mind tried to dismiss it? Go deeper. Why are you already thinking about watching this again? That urge you're feeling right now, to go back to the beginning, to look for clues you might have missed, to understand it all more clearly. Where did that thought come from? And most importantly, who planted it? Was it really your decision to watch this video in the first place? Think back to how you found it, the sequence of clicks, the chain of recommendations, the seemingly random path that led you here. Random or designed? You're thinking about Sarah Chen now, aren't you? Wondering if she's real, wondering if she really predicted this exact moment, these exact thoughts running through your mind, wondering if she knew you, specifically you, would be here, listening to these words, asking these questions. But here's the thought that should really keep you up tonight. What if this video found you? What if your consciousness was already prepared to receive this message, already primed for expansion, already part of a pattern set in motion years ago? You'll try to forget about this, try to dismiss it as an elaborate story, but you'll notice things now, small things at first, moments when time doesn't flow quite right, decisions that feel predetermined, dreams that feel more real than memories. And when these things happen, not if, but when, you'll remember this moment. You'll remember these words. You'll remember that you were warned, that you were chosen. The thought is already there, isn't it? Growing, spreading, changing how you see reality itself, because that's what Sarah Chen designed this for. Not just to tell you a story, but to wake you up to the story you're already part of. Sweet dreams. If you can still tell the difference between dreams and memories. And remember, you didn't find this video, it found you. It always had.